Shefa. We've traveled through ancient caves, the void of space, and interdimensional portals to bring you music like you've never heard before. We are the Partners of Revelry. I'm your humble rogue Bramble, and you are listening to Campaign Spotlight.
Hey there, mages and mystics.
In our very first episode of Season 4, we're chatting with Dante of Chance Encounter Games about running a campaign across multiple tables.
This episode is brought to you by Goblin Society Games.
Go check out their book of 300 magic items for D&D 5e campaigns, Muckreg's Compendium of Curios. It's full of weapons, armor, and spellcasting focuses, all designed with effects that really engage with 5th edition mechanics.
I've been using it in my long-running home game. In a recent session, the party found the Arcanist Gloves, which let a spellcaster use a higher-level spell slot to increase a spell's save DC. This has made some lower-level spells like Tasha's Hideous Laughter surprisingly effective once again. It's also added some great flavor to a story about uncovering the secrets of ancient mages. I'd highly recommend it.
We'll link to the Goblin Society Games website in our show notes. Through July 23rd, if you purchase Goblin Society game products on Drive-Thru RPG, they'll donate 10% of the proceeds to Partners in Health.
Let's roll initiative.
It's morning time. The fishing boats distant specks as they make their way out to sea, but you are in the silent interior of a musty old warehouse, far from the bustle of the city. As the bell tower rings out, announcing the hour of your intended rendezvous, a hulking shape darkens the morning sun peeking through the gaps in the warehouse door's aged planks. Ashen fingers with sickly green nails, cracked and almost talon-like, curl around the door's edge as it is pushed open, revealing a figure completely obstructing your view of the alley outside. Bowing his head to cross the threshold, Snarl Nash squeezes through the door with surprisingly quiet steps. Easing the door shut behind him, he rises up to his full 15-foot height and gingerly pulls the hood of his tent of a cloak from his head, revealing a broad mouth with tusks protruding from his lower jaw, a flat, broad nose, and a flatter, broader, bald head. His eyes, little more than 2 faint pinpricks of emerald green light, hide below a jagged cleft of a brow, and his ears, small and low to his thick neck, come to ragged points. His skin is sallow, papery, and his cheeks are sunken, emphasizing the enormity of his mouth even when closed. This emaciated ogre casts his calculating gaze over each of you before addressing you as a group in an echoing, sonorous voice.
Greetings. I am Snarl Nash the Undying. I serve as emissary of the Whispered One to those on this side of the gate who might act in alignment with his purpose. I submit to your scrutiny and any magics you wish to use to test the veracity of my claims.
That was incredible. Dante, welcome to Campaign Spotlight.
Thank you.
That is a hell of an opening. Before we get into anything else, I have to ask, is Snarl Nash like a recurring character throughout? I seriously hope so.
He is about to be. This was actually a bit of play-by-post roleplay that I posted in our Discord just a couple of days ago because one of my groups is heading out into a new chunk of their campaign, and Snarl Nash is their quest giver.
extremely fun. And I guess you queued up when you said one of my groups. You queued up really well what we're going to be talking about today. But first off, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. I am Dante Santos of Chance Encounter Games. I am professional, full-time tabletop role-playing game person. And I run games for a living, mostly private sort of either one-shots or private campaigns. I don't do any streaming, as exciting as that would be. And I also sort of dabble in the world of making little upcycled tabletop gaming supplies to keep my hands busy while I'm running games. But mostly I run games for a living, and I live up here in Seattle, and never ever use my mechanical engineering degree.
That is a mood. Never using the thing you went to school for is a big mood. Before and I guess you've been professional full-time GM for a while now. Tell us about your experience getting into tabletop gaming in the first place.
Yeah, so I've been playing since high school. Played a lot of 3.5 back in high school, and then dabbled in it after college. And it's always has been a great way of giving my friends an excuse to hang out together, right?
Absolutely.
And then in like 2019-ish, I started getting really back into it, doing a lot of Adventures League out here in Seattle, and wanting to run some of my own games. And I was running Lost Mine of Phandelver, good old chestnut, learning how to properly DM, and then started running one-shots for friends, and then one-shots for friends of friends, then one-shots of friends of friends of friends of friends. And eventually they were like, hey, so you're paying a lot of money for like D&D Beyond and Roll20 and all these map Patreons. Can we like chip in? And I was like, sure. Here's a link to my Ko-fi. But then when the pandemic hit, and everyone was sequestered away from each other and needed a way to hang out together that didn't involve being in the same room and breathing the same air, suddenly running games online became extremely popular. And I realized that this weird niche skill set I'd built up was really applicable and useful, and hopefully, valuable and helpful in such a trying time. And so I posted, hey, I'm starting a campaign. I'm thinking this sort of thing. Send me a message if you're interested in maybe doing something. We'll see whose schedule's aligned. And over 100 people responded.
Wow!
And so I went from like 1.5 home games to 11 weekly campaigns. And I have begun to exercise some moderation since then. I now have a sort of standard set of 5 to 7 games a week, depending on if I'm running workshops and tutorials and stuff. But I'm still going strong. I love it very much. And now I am switching from mostly online games to mostly in-person games, because it turns out there's a lot of people around here who really want to play.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's nowhere with as many people that just casually want to play TTRPGs as Seattle.
Yeah.
And you're also definitely not the first person we've talked to for whom that like lockdown era in 2020, 2021, when like all you could kind of do was work.
Yeah.
And then sit at home. And I think that was an era for getting into pretty intensely into TTRPGs because you can kind of play them over Zoom.
You got houseplants, you've got sourdough, and you've got D&D. Yeah. That was the sort of makeup.
Did your sourdough ever turn out?
I luckily managed to skip the sourdough train because I had failed at sourdough about a year or so earlier. but I am surrounded by houseplants. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Actually, in the video call right now, yes, I can see like I think 3 or 4 plants. So.
Yeah, I've got monsteras hanging up over my monitor in my windows here. So yeah,
that's really nice. Actually,
it's cozy. I like it.
And so you were running up to 11 games at the same time.
Yeah. It was absolutely wild. I massively overcommitted myself. But I was just excited that people were excited.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And, I was also trapped inside and bored and needed something to distract myself. So it wasn't the worst.
And since then you've narrowed it down to a more sustainable set of games.
Yes, yeah.
And it sounds like you also have a home game running at the same time?
I do. I have a long-running campaign that has been going since 2019. And
incredible.
I actually recently was able to, for the first time in a long time, be a player in a home game.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. I don't know anything that's happening. It's so strange to not know what's going on. But yeah, so I'm also playing in one game right now as well.
That's got to be a great feeling. I don't know what that's like, but I've been pressuring Riley to GM sometime soon, so maybe someday I'll get to be a player. But yeah, so you early on in the call you mentioned your games plural, and one thing that I think is cool about the way that you run your campaigns is that some of them are all happening in the same world, kind of at the same time.
Yeah. I don't know how relatable this is, though your listeners probably, this is more relatable than most, but
sure.
I played a lot of Adventurers League before I started doing this professionally, and one of my favorite types of play in Adventurers League was epics at conventions, where you've got, 5 to 20 tables all playing part of the same adventure, all with different players at each table, tables from tier 1 to tier 4, and every tier has like a different adventure that they're doing. Every table has a different objective they're trying to accomplish, and you're all collaborating towards one overarching goal. And there's like NPCs that are moving from table to table, and you might have a Dracolich like swoop by, and everyone at the table real time is like, okay, everybody do as much damage in one attack as you can, and then they move on, and at the end you're like, congratulations, your table did the most damage to the Dracolich of anyone at the convention. Like things like that, where you've got lots of people having a shared experience and you're each contributing your own way was one of the coolest forms of organized play I ever did in Adventurers League. And I think because I'd sort of seen that as an example, it didn't sound absolutely insane to put 5 campaigns in one continuous plot line.
Which is, when you think of it, like these events at conventions, and I've seen these happening, and they're incredible. But that is a kind of a one-time event, right? Where you have a bunch of kind of volunteer GMs putting in a lot of time and effort to make this one special day, like preparing a lot in advance.
Yes.
And then also, it's not like a continuous ongoing story, right? The thing is happening today and now. And what you're doing is actually it's a lot more ambitious than that.
Turns out when you don't have the benefit of suspension of disbelief of I'm doing this for 4 hours and then all it's going to matter is, what magic item I get on my log sheet. Like it turns out there's more work. But I have found it to 100% be worth it. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it to anybody else unless they're specifically interested in this experience.
Sure.
But it has been an absolute blast. And it only ever happened because of the way that I got into DMing. These concurrent campaigns were the very first ones that I started, because
Interesting.
my home game that I started in 2019, I was a baby DM, and I was using Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, the Critical Role Exandria world. But I was writing my own campaign for that setting. And being the overambitious person that I am, the campaign that I wrote for that setting was, I was like, oh, this is great. There are 8 arms of the betrayers. I'm going to send them on a happy little fetch quest to collect them all. That shouldn't take very long. Cue a year later, they are, 3/4 of the way to getting one of them.
Oh gosh, I thought you were going to say like they were 3/4 of the way through all 8.
No.
Wow.
Yeah. My parties tend to like sort of languishing in the world a little bit.
And that's fun, but if you're playing with multiple parties in the same setting, how does I guess let's back up maybe and talk about what is going on in this campaign that these multiple parties, are they all going for different arms?
Yeah, so I originally realized that, jumping from one home game to potentially running one or more campaigns online for money as well meant that I could conceivably split this quest that was way too big for one party across multiple parties. I'm like, okay, well, if I want to make each one of these, MacGuffins feel big and scary and important. Mm-hmm. And you can only fit so many big, scary, important things in a single campaign before you max level, right?
Right.
And so I was like, okay, yeah, we'll see how many people are interested. We'll see how many, calendars align and how many people's play styles drive together. And I'll just have each game prioritize a different one of these MacGuffins, and then together they'll solve this problem. It'll be great. And I started out with a spreadsheet that tracked the various timelines of all of the various groups, and was like, okay, so these people sank this island on this day, and these people are sailing across the ocean on this day. Do they see the island sink? Right?
Sure.
Trying to align all of those crossing paths. And I was lucky that for a long time it was only ever, you see a weird headline in the newspaper, that sort of thing.
I was just going to ask, how do they communicate with each other? Because they're all on these parallel missions.
Exactly.
To presumably get items for the same cause, but they can't really step in and directly help each other. So what does the flow of information look like between the groups?
So I, in my baby DMness, did make one very good decision, which was the antagonist, spoiler alert for literally nobody because it's a home game.
We absolutely cannot have spoiler alerts in the podcast.
The big antagonist of this arc is Lolth, the Spider Queen, Queen of Lies. And
cool.
Because let me back up and describe the sort of super arc to make any of this make sense.
Awesome.
Quick review for those who are not wildly steeped in Critical Role lore, because there's more of it every day. The world, Exandria. The gods used to walk the earth and were amongst us, but turns out that when the gods are here, all of their problems are here too. So after a big old war, they up and left and locked themselves behind a door called the Divine Gate. And now, clerics get access to their powers, and, you get magic, visions and stuff, but they're not actually here doing stuff.
Sure.
And this Divine Gate prevents both helpful and hurtful gods from having direct effect on the mortal realm. In my campaign, the sort of core problem that they're trying to solve is that Lolth, the Spider Queen, God of Lies, is trying to tear down the Divine Gate in order to get access to the mortal realm again. And
As one does.
You've always got, Tiamat's trying to break through, Vecna's getting resurrected again, yada, yada, yada. Somebody's always trying to gain access to the mortal realm. What we offer to those gods, I don't really understand. I don't see the value. But hey, I'm not a god. And so in order to do this, her whole plan is to gather these various arms of the betrayers, these extremely powerful magical weapons left behind at the end of the God War, the Calamity, and use them in a ritual to crack open the Divine Gate. And because, she doesn't have direct influence on the world, and because, her followers have dwindled massively after losing the God War, she elected to use subterfuge instead of direct action, as is her way. And so the way that she is trying to enact her plan is by leaking information about these powerful items that are out there, hidden away in tombs and protected in various vaults and stuff, to do-gooders who want those things, not to fall into the wrong people's hands. And essentially, each one of my player groups got some information leaked to them about the location of this powerful and dangerous item. And of course they were like, oh, that's big and scary. I got to make sure that the various powers that be in the world don't get their hands on that. We're going to go dig it up and deal with it.
What do they do once they have it, I guess?
That is the question. But yeah, so it was pretty easy to send each group off in a different direction because I could just trickle different pieces of information to them. And it was all sort of diegetic because it was all being done under the guidance of this, deity.
Right. Who can actually see what's happening in different places at different times.
Exactly.
Like diegetically. Right.
So I have, as a DM, sort of a diegetic stand-in for my position in the structure of the narrative, which was a very convenient parallel. But everybody, once they get their hands on these things, is like, okay, well, I want to destroy it. And, there's a whole secondary quest once you go get the thing to do the special thing, take it to the volcano, mount it, and throw it in, right? And so there was sort of a built-in 2-part quest to each one of these directions that they could go in. And then, there's the third act twist, which is that actually she doesn't need the item itself. She needs the entity that's trapped in the item. So by destroying the item, you release the entity and actually further her plans, right? And so, it becomes a game of who can find out what's actually happening beyond, like, scary item. Okay, why are we being told to get scary item? What are we supposed to do with scary item? What is actually according to the big bad's plan and what is against the big bad's plan? And so a lot of these campaigns have been about information gathering, about sort of subterfuge and political machinations and sussing out who is, a secret agent of the Spider Queen and figuring out what they want versus what other people want. And so it adds this nice layer of exploratory roleplay on top of everything as well. And just this past month, for the first time, one of my parties contacted another one of my parties to share information. It's taken 4 years, but the streams have finally crossed.
I was, you just beat me to the question I was about to ask, which is what happens when they get useful information? Can they share it with each other?
Absolutely.
And it sounds like the answer is it just took them 4 years to get useful information.
Yeah. And well, it took them 4 years to get useful information, and it took them 4 years to learn about each other. Like above the table, the people that I'm running these games for know that the other games exist.
Right.
Diegetically, they have to reach a certain level of networking and connections or notoriety or something before, it's a big world. There are lots of adventurers out there doing all sorts of things. You don't know every adventurer out in the world. And so they had to find each other within the narrative. And so, like one of these parties ended up doing a huge heist at a magic item shop. And one of the other parties got a like wanted listing for that party. So one of my parties was like hunting the other one. And that was how they actually ended up making a connection, was through like a mutual NPC that they knew. They were like, ugh, also, have you seen this party? It's like a teenage dragonborn, a giant elephant man, a woman who's missing the top half of her face, and a tabaxi that rides a giant cat. Like, that's a pretty unique set of people. Do you know those folks? Because we have a 1 million gold reward out for them and the magic items that they stole. And NPC says, actually, I do. I do know those people. I've been working with them as well.
So that's the kind of notoriety they had to find.
Exactly, right? Until they become
was it deliberate? Like, were they trying to become notorious so that they could meet these other parties they knew existed over the table?
Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite, in fact. They screwed up that heist a fair amount, which is the only thing that allowed them to gain that level of notoriety. But they, each one of my parties has, like, my players have made jokes. They're like, oh, I can't wait until we, bump into those guys because, we're going to absolutely kick their asses or stuff like that. It wasn't until they sort of became known to each other through a mutual acquaintance that in fiction, they even considered being allies. And even still, they are pretty tenuous allies. They've exchanged a couple of sendings, but it's mostly like sass and sexual tension at this point, honestly.
I guess so. I'm going to ask a tactical question, then maybe a longer term one. Tactical question would be, are you relaying messages between groups and then they're responding?
Yeah, so when it became clear that this contact was going to be made, I had to make a choice about that. And I decided that the way that I wanted to do it is the player who was casting sending would record an audio message and I would ferry it over between Discord servers. And then, I would get an audio message in response and ferry it back. And so there's actually now like a sort of recorded dialogue of sendings between these groups of people, not only saying that they're communicating this, but actually performing this sending in character, which has just been so delightful.
And they get 25 words at a time, I guess. So they have to be pretty judicious.
Exactly. It's become a bit of a pissing contest between our wizards to see how verbose they can be, to see how many spell slots they're willing to spend on sending. Because they're like, yeah, I can spend, 6 spell slots on sending. I'm a mighty and powerful wizard. Yes, I had to tap into some of my higher level spell slots, but they don't need to know that.
That's very fun. I mean, I guess my longer term tactical question about this, though, is once you set up the incentive that everyone is going to tell the story by finding a lot of information and uncovering a lot of secrets.
Yes.
It feels very natural to say, we need to find everyone else who's looking for these secrets and on a parallel trajectory, right? Like, it does seem like in universe you would want to immediately find the other people who are doing the same thing as you.
Yes.
It sounds like that hasn't happened here, though.
Yeah, so for a very long time, each of these groups were sort of out on their own, solving this problem solo. And
Okay.
let's see, we've like 4 years into this epic. And a number of these groups individually had figured out that collecting the item was potentially benefiting their enemy. Destroying the item was potentially benefiting their enemy. But we're so programmed internally based on the media that we consume, books we read, movies we watch, that we're the main characters, right?
Sure.
And so if, other people are falling prey to this scam, they are, even if it's another group of PCs, it's very hard to make the logical jump to those are peers we can contact and work with from, those are NPCs eventually we're going to have to deal with, right? Being very ready to, identify a target that is an opposing adventuring group that you're going to have to then subsequently liberate these items from is the conclusion that a number of my groups came to was, when we figure out who and where they are, we're going to have to kick their asses, but we're going to deal with the one that we're dealing with now first.
Oh, so they really saw this as being like a PvP situation.
They really did. And it wasn't until...
Did you expect that?
I was anticipating that variance in play styles might result in that, because I had a number of groups that were very sort of subterfuge, cloak and dagger, and then other groups that were like big shiny paladin doing things for the good of the world sort of groups, right? And even if both of those groups have the same end goal, the way that they approach them will cause conflict inherently.
Oh, sure.
And in addition to that, these groups all had different levels of clarity as to what was going on. So you have one group that's saying, okay, well, there's this really bad item out there. We have to get it and destroy it. And then we have another group that's like, we and a number of other powerful people are being duped into doing the will of a betrayer god, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you, they become opposed even though they are similarly morally aligned because they have different levels of information. So I was totally prepared to get everybody in one big session and do a big PvP battle of heroes sort of situation, which might have resulted in casualties or, complete domination, because they're not all at the same level. Like, they're all within a couple of levels of each other, but, they're not all progressing at the same speed.
Sure.
Or they could have had a heart-to-heart realization mid-battle and suddenly become allies and switch directions, right? Depending on how the personalities of the characters meshed.
Right. And up until this point, it sounds like, you said that one group might have seen another group having sunk an island or something, but the information flow between groups was sparse up until this recent series of sending spells.
Yes.
And that seems like in the period when it is sparse like that, it seems like you as a GM for these multiple groups have a lot more freedom to, for example, have time flow at different rates, or have messages from Lolth flow out with different cadences. But once they're talking to each other, does that kind of yoke them all together?
It does sort of add a strange sort of, what's the Doctor Who term? Like a canon event, a moment that cannot be changed, right? It adds a anchoring point to the timeline of each story around which the surrounding timelines can flex.
Right.
And there was actually like some interesting suspension of disbelief stuff that we had to do for the like 1 week of meat space time that they were sending these messages back and forth.
Right.
Conveniently enough, they were both in moments of transition in their various stories. And so because they were both between arcs, we had this moment of downtime in both of the parties that were communicating with each other. And so we could say like, okay, this is a little bit like wiggly wobbly, timey-wimey. We know that, in this party, these sendings, this communication is happening between when you get back from Ankarel to Nicodranus and when you have your meeting with Snarlnash to go off on your next hunting quest. And in this party, it's happening between when you get back with your Dragon Wizard Summit and before you go and raid Pirate Island, right? And because we had these 2 chunks of downtime, I could just sort of like click them into place and be like, okay, these chunks of downtime overlap. And so you have like a week of in-fiction time for these communications and to make these choices. And since then, they have diverged in their timelines again, but we sort of reserve that period of in-fiction downtime for if they want to be having more communication, we can sort of flash back to that moment, even if we've progressed in the current day in those campaigns.
Got it. So at this point, they can't really easily send information between the tables because that would effectively be sending information through time.
Yeah. I mean, like they can share information about, they can have the communications, but they've each sort of decided what the next step of their future looks like. And they've decided that no matter what communications they get, it's not going to directly affect the exact next thing that they do. Which is fair and good and fine because they are working now under enough correct information that they're confident in their next steps, even if they're still sort of sussing out some of the details and building trust between the 2 parties.
Right. And do you foresee, because you have 4 parties in total in this overlapping world?
So we had, we had 5 total, 4 paid games and 1 home game.
Got it.
3 of the paid games have wrapped up since the beginning. They,
I see.
got their arm of the betrayer. They got their MacGuffin. They, packaged it up and sent it off and did their thing and said, okay, we're done. And, got to a certain level and the campaign ended. And so like a number of those, or inversely, one of my parties, got their MacGuffin, made a series of hilariously bad choices, and then got captured by one of the sort of governments of the world that was going after these items and have been thrown in jail. And it was like, okay, well, thank you very much for playing. This is the end of this particular arc. Your characters are in jail until they're rescued by someone. And so they contributed to the shuffling and unearthing of these items, but those stories have closed. And so now we are down to just 2 campaigns that are now fully in the know of why all of this is happening and how to stop it. and are now just sort of executing their various plans to prevent that from happening.
And are they fully in the know about the outcomes of those other 3 parties?
Yes.
Okay.
There are also NPCs in the world that have also been sort of looped into this madness, including a number of high-level wizards who have been keeping track of the location of these various items. They got access to legend lore and stuff like that. And so
Sure.
they now, as of the end of the Wizard Summit, they are aware of the locations of all of the items. And the wizards have 2 of them because they've been turned in by a couple of the parties. The parties have 2 of them. And the remainder are split between the Pirates of the Revelry and the Empire, the Dwendalian Empire, the king of the Dwendalian Empire. And so now we have these like 2 big scary edifices that have control of these items that are like high level adventure arcs for them to deal with.
And that also works well because there's 2 parties going after the 2 remaining items.
Exactly.
And do you foresee them ever interacting in real time, the 2 parties?
I do actually. So one of the parties is my home game, and the other one of my parties, we've been playing together for 4 years now. And
Sure.
That group actually, despite the fact that they are all over the US, at least once a year we come together in physical space. We call it family vacation. We've come together here in Seattle. We've gone over to like the beach on Jersey Shore. And we're planning for this coming year to gather in Seattle and have these 2 groups sit at the same table and actually figure this out. And there is going to be like a climactic moment where both groups come together in the place where Lolth is trying to enact this ritual and make or break, do or do not prevent it from happening. And so I now have the task of lining up these timelines so that these 2 campaigns converge on the day when everybody is going to be in Seattle. Which may be my biggest feat as a DM yet.
I was just going to say that it really does help that these parties know what's going on,
yes.
right? Over the table, everyone is really working with you on getting to the same place at the same time for this big climactic finale.
Yeah.
Because it would be kind of funny if everyone's like going to be in Seattle in a week and one party's like, oh, one of our members got turned to stone, another one got captured.
We're actually going to go off on this side quest and be totally not there for this. No, it's nice that everyone in my games is really comfortable with player knowledge, character knowledge separation, and everyone is very much on board with being collaborators and telling a cool story. And
that part seems crucial. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why these 2 games have been so successful is that, it's not me trying to herd a bunch of cats. It's me, one of the cats in the herd, trying to collectively, I don't know, take down the government, whatever the cats apply.
I love this metaphor. It's awesome that you do have this understanding now, right? Where your players all know, hey, we're in the same world, and we need to make sure that our story lines up well with this climax, with this grand finale. Did they know going in that it was going to end up like this?
I don't think any of us knew going in that it was going to end up exactly like this, which is part of the joy of tabletop role-playing games, right? But everybody joining the games knew that they were in a shared narrative. And before I expanded from my home game to add these paid games, I made sure that, I talked both with my table as a whole and each individual player, seeing if they were okay sort of sharing this world that, you know, I had
Right.
made for them with other people. Because, you know, you don't knit a sweater for someone and then say, hey, you're going to be sharing this sweater with all of your friends and also some people you haven't met. Right?
Sure.
And I am big on enthusiastic consent. I am big on player autonomy. And so I wanted to really make sure that everyone was fully informed and very down with the idea before any of
Right.
this ever started. When I originally made the campaign, as I mentioned, I was planning on this just being, you know, some cute little fetch quests for my home game before realizing it was way bigger than any of our bridges. But, you know, once it became clear that this was an interesting opportunity, I noodled on it and what the implications and logistics of it would be. I knew that it was going to have to be a collaboration, and I knew that it would be unfair to hook people into it without them knowing really what was going on. You know, I had conversations with the table as a whole and each player individually because enthusiastic consent and player autonomy are incredibly important to me. And
100%.
I wanted to make sure that, you know, this was a thing that everybody was very much on board with, because this is a story that I originally made specifically for them. And, you know, you don't make someone a sweater and give it to them for Christmas and say, here, a present for you. And also all of these other people you don't know. I hope you don't mind sharing, right? Like that's...
These other people who were paying for the sweater.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a pretty wild thing to do. But luckily my folks in my home game were super into the idea of this being like a larger thing.
Right.
And folks seemed really responsive to it because that was part of the listing, the posting for these games in the first part, was that, you know, everybody that joined was going to be joining into a world that already exists, more like an MMORPG than you know, somebody running the same hardcover D&D campaign for multiple groups at the same time, right? And that really appealed to a lot of people.
And did they know going in that it was going to be several years before there was any overlap?
I don't think any of us knew exactly how that was going to go. There are, you know, some of the groups that joined initially, like their arcs, their characters' stories ended, you know, a year or so in. You know, we've had people, you know, it started out with 5 games and now we're down to 2, and those games concluded when it made sense to them, and a number of them
Of course.
never even really learned the underlying truths of the situation. They interacted with it at a level where, you know, they weren't really questioning the status quo too much. Like, they got a quest to go get a magic item, and that's what you do in D&D, is you get a quest and you get the magic item, right? It's only these groups that spent more time in the world and started, you know, questioning some of the you know, not so obvious cracks in the logic that
Right.
ended up unearthing the truth of the matter and eventually contacting one another.
Right. Just these last 2.
Yeah.
Do you feel like for the other ones, it's still a satisfying storytelling experience to just embrace the trope and say,
Oh, yeah.
we're getting the thing, and now we've gotten the thing?
I mean, there's a reason why it is a trope, right? It's a narrative structure that works.
Yeah.
And it's very satisfying. And, you know, the 2 games that I have still working in this narrative, the players are very deeply thoughtful and suspicious people, right? They're folks that are always, you know, they're the types of players that will be like, oh, DM, I see what you're doing. This thing actually means this. And you're like, yeah, it definitely does. And it totally didn't just change to that right now because that's a brilliant idea, right? Like, these two groups are chock-a-block full of that type of player. And,
Got it.
you know, it's really fun to play games with that sort of person who's just like lying awake at night thinking about these things. But it's also totally fun to play with people who just want to have like beautiful heroic moments and moments of, you know, interpersonal drama or, you know, like deeply earth-shattering sorrow, but aren't going to like look super deep into the nature of the world. They just sort of are in the story, not necessarily shaping the story.
Oh, I just think that's that's honestly the ability to just be in the story and not bring in your kind of out of world knowledge and your kind of like meta expectations. That seems almost like a hard skill. Like, I don't think I could play in a game and do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like second nature to some people to just like, they just assume that they're, you know, in The Hobbit, right? They're in
Sure.
the Two Towers, right? For some people, it's second nature to be like, yes, I am here to bring my OC to this story, and they just live in that, and it's wonderful. And for other people, it's their second nature to see through to the meta narrative and engage with the story in a very sort of genre savvy sort of way. And
Right.
it's really interesting because in my session zeros with any of my games, you know, beyond just asking what folks' history with D&D is, it's also understanding a little bit about some of those less obvious assumptions that folks are bringing to the table. And a lot of the conversations I have with people during those session zeros, I have specifically to suss that out so that I make sure I don't have groups that are mixtures of people who are there to analyze the meta narrative and people who are there to swing big sword, right?
And that feels like it especially matters in this kind of setting
Yes.
where people really do need to be work together with the meta narrative.
Yeah. Or elect not to. It's totally fine to do either, because the folks who elected to not engage in the meta narrative essentially just became, from the perspective of the folks who did choose to engage in the meta narrative, extremely well fleshed out NPCs, right?
Sure.
Because they were fully bought into the fiction, not only of the world, but in the world, they were, quote unquote, perfect pawns in this, you know, deific scheme. And so, you know, 4 years in, the positions of these different MacGuffins are wildly different than where they were at the start of the campaign. And part of that is
Right.
due to NPC actions, you know, in the background. But I'd say more than half of it is due to the machinations of the other groups that have, you know, since concluded their narrative. And, you know, some of them put those items in easier to reach or less dangerous positions. And some of them, you know, put them right in the hands of King Dwendal, right? And so from the perspectives of the players today, things just shifted around in the background. Like, I could have made those decisions. Other players could have made those decisions. They don't really see the difference. But to those players, they had a, you know, complex and interesting and dynamic quest line, and then they finished, and that was the end of the story to them. But it was just a background thing or the beginning of a story for a totally different group.
I really like that and that zoomed out perspective where, you know, in a way we're all fully fleshed out NPCs in each
Yeah.
other's heroic stories.
Yeah.
And your description of like having a party that is composed of players who who have uniform expectations. That seems really helpful for this kind of game, eh?
Yeah, that's something I worked really hard for when assembling these groups, and honestly something I work hard for when I'm assembling any group. When I am forming a D&D table, I do it by, putting a broad sort of casting call out there, and I try to make sure I'm getting at least 3 times as many applicants as seats at the table, so that I make sure that the play styles, the expectations, the assumptions that are coming to the table, they don't all need to be the same. Like it shouldn't be a homogenous, like single viewpoint group of people. That's boring and unrealistic. But making sure that they align and support each other in a way that isn't going to cause conflict or frustration or dissatisfaction amongst the players.
Understood. Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. I guess other than that, for any of our listeners who are trying to put together something similar, I mean, your point is well taken about, hey, you probably want to have parties that are going to move through the narrative in parallel in a nice way. But beyond that, what recommendations would you give to people who are like, hey, this sounds wildly ambitious, very fun, potentially leading to a cool payoff after 5 or 6 years. I want to do the same thing. How would you tell them to start up something similar?
Yeah, I would say learn from my mistakes. I've got a couple of things that, like I said, I started this when I was a baby DM. It was like my very first little home game, and it was too big, and so I started sharing it and made it so much more complicated than it needed to be. My primary piece of advice, especially for doing an ambitious project like this, but honestly for anybody who's running a home game or any sort of game, is don't sweat the small stuff, right?
Interesting.
My attitude going into this campaign initially was that it's not going to work unless I know all of the mechanics of everything that's going on all of the time. And I need to manually manage all of these moving cogs. And only through my divine intervention will any of this work, right? Which turns out to be A, wrong, and B, sort of a little bit of an inflated ego, right? Like I am here to make sure everybody makes it onto the group call on Discord, and to occasionally voice Goblink, the goblin trinket trader, right? Like, I am here to facilitate. The players are the ones that are driving the story the vast majority of the time. And, making all these things, because everybody's invested in it being a cool thing. So, yeah, it's a little bit like that. I need to control every facet of it, otherwise it won't work, is wrong, and also, slightly hot-headed. Like, when I started this, the spreadsheets. The spreadsheets were insane. I had a spreadsheet that had every item for sale in every shop on the entire continent in it, and rollable tables to restock every single one of those places. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. I
mean, you said you're not using your
it.
engineering skills. It sounds like you're doing some engineering right there.
It was, oh my gosh. The Excel, it was, and managing the timeline, I had exactly the same sort of problem. I was like, okay, if I stagger them by this amount, and I start these people here and those people there, and then I keep track of where they are in the world on this day, and the months have this many days in them, and this many days in a week, and also in Exandria, there's actually 13 months. And, no. Everything moves at the speed of plot.
Yeah.
And honestly, watching Dimension 20 and seeing the way that the folks who have to fit their stories into like 9 or 20 episode seasons manage time and narrative pacing taught me so much about what it's actually valuable to track. because unless you have a lycanthrope in your party or somebody who's like cursed by the moon, and granted, those people exist in my parties because it's Exandria and they have a moon that curses you. Unless you have somebody where there are narrative or mechanical implications by what day of the month it is, it does not matter. It's cool to, see the passage of seasons and understand that, stuff takes time, but it's only worth tracking if you are getting something out of the other end.
Right. No, I appreciate this. This is really practical advice for doing it, especially a huge, ambitious multi-table project like this. Not everything can be micromanaged.
Do less and trust your players is really what it is. Because there's going to be enough going on. You're not going to have not enough to do as a GM in a project like this. You don't need to add extra complications and tasks and burdens and paperwork to yourself to make it happen. Focus on making sure that there's narrative payoff, that the pacing is good, that there is opportunities for these parties to start to interlink together. That is so much more important than knowing what day of what month it is.
This is great advice, honestly, I think, for GMing any kind of game. I really appreciate this. I really appreciate how thoughtful you are about this. Do you have any other just closing thoughts or advice to give to the audience about running this kind of ambitious multi-table campaign?
Yeah, I think that it's really important at the get-go to, as part of establishing expectations with your players, really make it a collaborative storytelling experience. Make sure that everyone is on board with being part of this crazy experiment, because something this complex, something this broad, it's my full-time job to do this. And there are teams of people that manage systems this complex, right? And if you don't have buy-in from all of the participants, if you have people who are pushing back on the format itself, that is a level of complexity that makes it really difficult to make the moment-to-moment actual planning and execution of the campaign really hard. I was lucky enough that everybody that I brought in came in under the expectation that this was going on, and that the folks that I have that are the most interested in continuing to engage with the broader narrative are interested in being part of the creation of this larger project. But it's entirely possible to accidentally, have someone not understand fully what they're getting into, to not understand yourself entirely what the implications are. Lord knows I didn't fully understand it at the beginning. I just lucked into this working, basically. And so, if you're looking at this now, please benefit from my 4 years, 5 years of hindsight, and, really think about what the implications of the structure are and make sure everybody's on board, because it can be super cool and super fun and a really satisfying collaborative storytelling experience if everybody is on board.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have any, I guess, you've mentioned a couple inspirations. I mean, Critical Role is a huge one, obviously.
Yes.
Is there any other media that you feel like has really informed the DNA of your campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned also Dimension 20 taught me a lot about what I value in narrative storytelling, taught me a lot about the power of bringing improv comedy sort of structure and beats into storytelling and narrative. I feel like my pacing and both like at a campaign arc level and also at a moment-to-moment gameplay level, have improved massively from, consuming that media. But also, I think that basically any level of applying media literacy to the media that we consume, whether it be, reading or watching fantasy content. Lord of the Rings is a big inspiration for a lot of this content.
Sure.
Also, looking at Baldur's Gate 3, right? That was a huge thing that brought a lot of people into the hobby. And when you are a DM looking at formatting a campaign that is too big for its britches, there's no campaign out there that is more big for its britches than Baldur's Gate 3, right? So seeing how they addressed a lot of those problems can be really, educating, inspiring. Thematically and like content-wise, some quote-unquote media, I guess, that's pretty inspirational to me. Che and Piku and the sort of collaboration project that they're part of, Burrowbound. They are map and asset and content creators for tabletop role-playing games. And so many of their maps and the cities that they've built have so much beautiful little detail in them. There are times when, if you're creating something from more or less scratch, if you're not running something from a hardcover book where you're given maps and it has all of the secret doors and stuff in there already, it's so nice to be able to lean on really creative people creating set pieces in the world to add a level of richness to the content, so that you can take your overall idea, your plot beats, your et cetera, and say,
Right.
okay, this fits really nicely like in this level of this dungeon. But you don't necessarily have to think about like, oh, this trap goes here and that NPC goes there and this picture is where the secret door is, because the sort of imagery that they provide includes that. So I really recommend for folks, if you're building your own campaign, check out Che and Piku on Patreon, Burrowbound on Patreon, because they create stuff that is just so full of richness and inspiration.
Incredible. Yeah, we'll absolutely link to them in the show notes. And thanks for the recommendations. Finally, do you have anything that you'd like to plug to the audience?
Oh, sure. Yes. I am starting up 3 new campaigns, and I'm starting them up in Seattle in Meat Space. They are not going to be part of the same shared world, but one of them is going to be using the skills that I learned from this shared world project, in combination with skills that I learned in running a lot of Adventurers League stuff. On Saturday nights, by the Roosevelt Light Rail Station in Seattle, at Chance Encounter Games,
Cool.
the game shop that I am opening up this spring. I am going to be running a campaign that I call, oh, thank you very much. I'm very excited. I get to decorate it and it's going to look like a bog witch lives there. Anyway, I'm really excited. But the campaign is called Lost Dragons Thunder. It's a combination of Lost Mines of Phandelver, Dragon of Icespire Peak, and Storm King's Thunder. It goes from level 1 to level 10, and if you're interested, can go all the way to level 20, and is a really flexible drop-in campaign. It is a pull a quest off the quest board, that is the adventure that you do tonight game. It's extremely beginner friendly, and it's just, you sign up for the night that you want to play a week in advance. and you bring a character of your choice, of the appropriate level, and you come in, you join the adventurers that are tackling this problem, you do the episode, you contribute, any items or information that is helpful to the broader cause, to the shared pool, and then you go. And so it's a really great way to experiment with different character builds, to learn D&D in a really low-stakes sort of campaign, and to play around a little bit in the Sword Coast and try and deal with what the heck is up with all these giants and dragons everywhere.
That sounds extremely fun. And hey, when Chance Encounter Games has the physical space, if you're up for it, maybe we'll come out there and do an on-site and come ask people about the characters. That would be
so much fun. Yes, we absolutely should. Chance Encounter Games, our grand opening, assuming the renovations go according to plan, will be on June 1st. So come drop by. We're like a block and a half away from the Roosevelt Light Rail Station.
Hell yeah. I genuinely can't wait to come check it out. Dante, thank you so much. This has been incredibly fun. Your multi-table campaign sounds absolutely wild, and grateful to you for sharing it with our listeners.
Thank you so much for chatting with me about it. It's been an absolute blast.
That's all for this week. I'm Dungeon Inspector Jake.
And I'm Production Master Riley.
Thanks again to Goblin Society Games for sponsoring this episode.
Go check out their website, which we've linked to in the show notes.
If you enjoy the show, consider subscribing and leaving a review, which helps other people find Campaign Spotlight.
If you'd like to support our work, consider going to patreon.com/Campaign Spotlight and becoming a patron.
And if your friends keep telling you to take off that cursed amulet, maybe they weren't real friends to begin with.
For more on the show, including links to all our social media, visit folderfrequencies.com/Campaign Spotlight.